product, service, campaign, or business, or reintroduce your brand? How do you avoid a failed launch when stakes are so high? Joining us today are Justin Watkins and Jake Jacobson of Native Digital, one of KC's fastest growing companies. You will hear from these two about how to launch a new initiative in a noisy and uncertain marketplace. This talk covers both long-standing principles as well as new techniques that modernize how we introduce ideas to an attention-starved world. With that said, I'll stop sharing my screen and give control over to Justin and Jake.
All right, thank you very much. I'm gonna hop over here and start sharing mine. Let's do this thing. All right, good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. We're so glad we've got such a packed room and we're seeing a lot of familiar faces and a lot of new friends in here. So we're excited to have this conversation, and we really do want it to be a conversation. And so as you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Justin and I will be taking turns talking so we can keep an eye on the chat, and we hope to leave time for Q&A at the end. But my name is Jake Jacobson. I'm the VP of Growth and Partnerships at Native Digital. And we've also got Justin Watkins. Justin, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, Justin Watkins here, CEO and founder of Native Digital. And Jake, let's take it away.
All right.
So this deck that we're walking through was actually, I have to tell you, it was put together pre-COVID. And what we found is when we decided to look at this material and see if it was relevant or not during this time, we felt like it actually is probably more relevant. We're often involved with companies whenever they're trying to launch either a new company, a new product, or a new initiative. And it feels like a lot of us are kind of, as we're getting into this reopening, or a lot of us are sort of reintroducing ourselves to people again. So we wanted to start off and just kind of lay the context here for the attention that when we're trying to grab attention from customers and from our audiences, what are we competing with? Well, there's a lot of people with new initiatives. When we look at startups, how many startups do you guys think are launching each month in the United States? We're gonna make this a quiz here. I'd like to hear in the chat window or people shout it out however we can do it. What do you think we're launching here in the United States in terms of startups? Is it 700 a month, 7,000, or 77,000 a month? What do you guys think? Seen some 7,000s, 7,000, 7,000.
Popular number.
Shooting for the middle here. Jake, you want to hit him with the answer? Actually lied to you guys, didn't give you the option. It's 775,000 startups every month are starting in the US, and that number is not decreasing, it's increasing. If you look at this 15 years ago, it was 28% less. So every year there's more people starting new initiatives, which matches probably what you hear in the news. You always hear about some new startup, new business, and it just keeps ramping up. If you're to look in the more established organizations, let's not look at, they've already launched, they're more established, but they've got new products coming out. And one of the things that we've also found is that if you are to take all the companies in the world in the Fortune 500, and you're to say these 25% are the most successful, here's kind of the middle of the pack, and here's the least successful, and you look at how often they're launching a new product, the people in that top quadrant, they're launching more products and are getting 30% of their revenue from those new offerings. When I saw this, I was actually kind of taken back by it, because I've always really admired the companies who are sort of limiting and reducing the number of products. If you look at some of the things like Apple was famous for, when Steve Jobs came back, he reduced a lot of the product line. What this stat doesn't show you is that they may be also cutting products, right? It's just that they're introducing new ones and probably replacing some of the old ones, but they're staying very active, getting new things out into the market. And then we didn't want to leave out the nonprofits, and we wanted to see if it was the same case with them, and it for sure is the same case. If you look at this every 5 years, how many public charities are launched in the United States, it's increasing at a pretty fast clip. It's up 45% over the past 15 years. So all this to say that there's just a lot of people launching.
Yeah, this is my favorite slide, just because I can sit here getting mesmerized. But yes, today we're talking launching because people be launching. And at Native, as Justin mentioned, we work with a lot of folks with brand strategy, with creative messaging, with performance marketing. And we often come in at this point where there's a new story to be told. And the truth is, as you saw, between new startups and just people making a lot more noise through different channels, there's just more and more brands competing for our attention. And the hard part is when you look back at all the metrics, a vast majority of them fail to meet those goals. And, this has always been the case. This is going to be the case. And it's why what we're trying to focus on today is really trying to figure out how you can meet those goals within those first few years of a new initiative, of a new startup, even a new campaign. I know we've got some nonprofits here. It might even be a new event that you're starting. And so we're just trying to figure out what are all the elements that go into a successful launch. And when we look at why some of those folks don't meet their goals, a lot of it's because brands don't starve, they die from indigestion. And it's trying to be all things to everyone. If you think about meetings where you're in and somebody asks, who's our target audience? And someone at the leadership table says, well, we want to talk to everyone. I think that's the hard part, is you're trying to do too much for everyone. Because, being awesome at one thing is tough enough. Being awesome at 100 things is really hard. But for all the communicators and marketers in the room, we all know successfully communicating, being awesome at 100 things is the hardest part about all of that. So what you're going to hear today is this idea of trying to do all of this successfully in an attention-starved world. And when attention is low, which is always, right now I'm guessing some folks are probably checking their email, but you've always got to be sharp as a knife. So with that, let's get to our points.
So we're going to prioritize, or what are some of the things that will really get people's attention, and how do we do that the fastest way possible? And I believe that naming is one of those ways that quickly communicates a lot in a very little. And so when we talk about naming, a lot of times we're brought in when we're trying to name a company, name a new product, sometimes just name a new initiative or a new event or something like that. But that name, it carries a lot with it. And when in our conversations, we typically meet organizations who have one of two opinions about the name. Either it's hard and it should convey the value prop and it should pack a punch and it should be ownable, or we'll meet people who say, well, naming's the easy part. This can be anything. And we frequently hear people say, well, look at Google, look how successful they are, and they have a nonsensical name. So let's talk about Google. So when Google started, they didn't start as Google, actually. Their company's name was Backrub. Their innovation had to do with backlinks and citing references to prioritize the web. It was later that they became Google. So I'm not sure Backrub would have became the verb that Google has become today had they stuck with that.
Which is probably a good thing.
Yes. Like we said, we can talk about companies, products, initiatives. We're going to show some examples here of companies, and we're going to look at a couple different ways that you can kind of chop this up and what camps you can be in when you're thinking about your name. We tend to think that there's about 5 camps that you can start in. One is a very descriptive name. So when you see the name, you kind of know that it communicates something to you. There is a metaphor where there's a bit of a deeper meaning that's not readily, the first time you're introduced to it, you may not know exactly what that means, but maybe it intrigue you. There's the abstract names. There's founders' names, and there's acronyms, which is my least favorite, but those are sort of an evolution out of some of these things, usually over time. Of these 5, we ask ourselves which communicates quickly and which grabs attention. So if we're trying to launch and we're trying to be strategic about the name, which of those camps should we start in? And we have a preference. We like the descriptive names and the metaphorical names. So the reason why we like descriptive is it really quickly describes the product and the value prop. If you introduce the name Groupon to someone for the first time, they might think, well, it probably has something to do with groups and it sounds like coupon. They basically just explain the service, right? Now the risk there is sometimes it can be boring. It can be too on the nose and it's not intriguing, which is where metaphor comes in as a good example. Metaphors typically grab attention because you don't know exactly what it means. It evokes something that's pretty interesting. People who know the backstory on Google, it ladders up with what they represent. It's this kind of idea versus a thing. The same with Nike. Now, the others are not the wrong approach. It's just when you're trying to grab attention, we tend to stay on that side. Now, the thing about the metaphorical ones and some of the abstract, they tend to be a little bit more of an empty vessel. So they could really represent anything you want. And it's not wrong to go that way, but it's also not instantly clear. So that just means you have to commit to pouring meaning into that name, because it doesn't intrinsically say or communicate a particular thing. It gives you all kinds of freedom to communicate what you want, but you do have to invest time to make sure you make that name mean something.
And so then that's what gets us into messaging, because nobody's going to know what you're talking about unless you tell it to them clearly. And the first problem with this is you have to slow your scroll. So again, right now, I'm guessing you probably have a couple different monitors going and you're checking something else, and maybe there's a dog wanting to get outside. But when we do this live, we will literally look up into the audience and we'll see a good number of people doing this, even just as we're talking. And so if this looks or feels like you at any given time, even waiting in line at Home Depot, you realize just how limited that attention span is. And so we try to figure out, how can we slow the scroll? How can we have that thumb stopping moment? First part is you have to open strong. So you have to be able to have that strong headline just to first be able to get their attention. So you want to make sure that you're not easing into it. But you also can't put all of your emphasis there, because you have to close strong. You know, I've thought about this before, as I've now found myself doing a lot of thumb scrolling, and I'll look at something, I might even chuckle at it, or I might kind of raise my eyebrows with an interesting statistic. But I realized that within 2 or 3 minutes, you could quiz me and ask me what brand that was or what I was supposed to do with that information, and I wouldn't know. And so the closing is just as important as getting their attention. You want them to know your tagline, your mantra. What do you want them to do with that information you just gave them? And so what we'll do a lot of times with different clients is we try to make it fun. You know, we develop a playbook where we figure out so that everyone is speaking from kind of the same hymnal, and everyone can work these situations, figure out who's your audience, what's the context, what are you trying to convey, what's your call to action, and then we write it down so that whether you're handing this to the CEO, to a salesperson, or a customer service rep, that they're all speaking the same thing and that they're all, you know, on the same page, because you want that congruency from every contact point. And then we exercise it. I mean, just like you have to exercise, which I've gotten bad about during the lockdown, but you have to exercise your messaging as well. And so we will literally take things into a room and workshop it with folks. And we'll even put things up like, all right, which of these sounds most like your brand and why? And if you were going to be talking about these different aspects, what would you want to do and how could you adapt it into your brand voice? So make it a game, make it fun. With all of this stuff, you should be having a lot of fun with it. My dad always says, if you're not having a good time, you're not doing it right. And I think that's the same way here, where you want to make sure that it's fun for everybody. And then you're going to realize that all these messages stick with folks. And then once you establish those rules, bend them, because you also don't want to sound so formulaic that you sound like a boilerplate of a press release every time you're talking to someone, because right now we're facing a lot of competition. I mean, I can see your eyes bouncing around this screen even, and a lot of things seem familiar and a lot of things will kind of, you know, catch your eye and make you chuckle. So standing out ain't easy. And so you know that you've got to have that crystal clear message. So what we like to do is we like to make it 10% wrong. Oh, shoot. Not just a second. Not that. Okay, here, wait. There. So we try to make it 10% wrong because thanks to the internet, thanks to everything being so perfectly polished, we can all smell advertising a mile away. And so because we can see when someone's trying to spam us, when someone's trying to sell us, we like to have that 10% wrong so that we make it more relatable. So you make it more real. Anymore, I mean, if you've seen, you know, all the celebrities doing their shows now from their living room, I think this period specifically has shown us that 10% wrong, or sometimes a little bit more, can absolutely be okay, because you're realizing the authenticity of it. Whereas if something is way too perfect, then you're not quite sure that you trust it. So try to be just a little bit wrong. You don't want to be so wrong that you're sloppy, but you really want to make sure that you're being real. And that's the best way to steal someone's attention, is to be authentic.
Yeah, so the next piece we're going to talk about is design. And when we're talking about at the beginning of an initiative, there's a lot of decisions being made. Design is going to be one of those. And it seems like design falls in one of two camps for a lot of folks. And so when you're launching a new effort, the question that you might be asking yourself is this a critical piece or is this a nice to have? And there's probably some people on here who say, I think it's critical. And the reason why they would say that is because it quickly communicates a lot. And very quickly, when you see something, how it's presented in the designs and aesthetics, It communicates a level of taste. It communicates an attention to detail. The way I think about it is, I'm going to pay attention to this because clearly someone paid attention to it. If it's been well designed, that takes time. And so I'm going to give it a little bit more time. But whether it comes down to critical or nice to have, it's usually the B word. Is it in the budget? And it can be a very difficult thing to justify and figure out how much do we spend on design, because it's so hard to quantify. It's one of the hardest things to quantify. So I'm going to make an attempt here today to quantify this. Years ago, there was a study, it's about 5 years ago, and they followed 16 design-centric publicly traded firms. And the way they evaluated this was they had this huge score sheet, and they went through the S&P 500, and they found the 16 firms who had the most design-centric organizations, not just the way it looks, but the way they operate. So design thinking through and through. Also happened to be that most of them had great visual aesthetics as well. So it probably wouldn't surprise you to see this list of brands here, especially Apple, Nike, Starbucks, Target. Might be a few on here that are surprising to you, but if you look at the way their organization functioned, it was very design centric. So they basically created this as a portfolio and looked at it from an investment strategy. Now, there's a lot of things that make a company successful, but they wanted to see if are the ones who prioritize design more successful than others. So that was the experiment that they ran. They called it the Design Value Index. And it was an attempt to try to quantify that. So if you look at the results, what they found from 2005 to 2015, they saw that their DVI portfolio outperformed the rest of the market by 211%. And this really stuck with me. This is one of the places where I felt like, man, they've really quantified this. This really speaks to the value of design. So in preparation for this talk, we went back and wanted to see what the latest was. It turns out that they haven't revisited the study in 5 years. So we had this sinking feeling like, oh no, did it not hold up? Has the stocks went down? Did the point's no longer valid? So we were kind of suspicious about this. We dug deeper and realized they abandoned the study, and we thought, oh no, it didn't work out. They probably have been underperforming. So we actually did the math for you guys, and we filled in that last gap of years. It's actually just really shot up and taken off. That it's no longer that they can brag that the DVI is 211%. It's now over 600% that it's gained. Now, if you do the math today, I'm sure the numbers are going to be crazy because we put this slide together pre-COVID. But it'll be really interesting to revisit this in another 10 years and see what happens whenever the market bounces back. But this is just to show you, I mean, it really stands out. Even as we were doing the math on this, you could take out a few of the high performers and it still outperformed. And so it really speaks to design's value, I think, more so than just about anything else. So are we going to use this as an investment strategy? Maybe. We'll probably just talk about it a lot because we're not really investors. But I think it does help you show, and you can always kind of keep this in your back pocket when people are talking about, should we budget for design or not?
Yeah, it goes well beyond just looking good. But the hard part is, since Justin said this comes down to the B word, and is it really in the budget? So let's talk money for a little bit. And a lot of times people wonder why, price would be part of a launch strategy. But what we're going to be talking about now is that price and also perceived value. Because as you can see, and again, this is no new news to anybody who's put out a business plan, but seeing it lined out can often help out because there's three elements here. You've got your cost of your product, you've got the price of the product, and then you've got the perceived value of the product. And this is how you want it lined up. Now granted, what does it have to do with the launch? You've got to try to figure out what area do you want to occupy on this spectrum. And communicating value, whether you're at the bottom or at the top, can be helpful to your brand, because there's plenty of brands that like to be kind of squinched down here at the bottom, and those are our budget brands, and they're not looking for high margins, but they also are turning a lot of different product, and the perceived value is still above the price and the cost. Now you could also be a luxury brand where your perceived value is way up here and your price is way up here, but you're still aligned, and people say, man, I love getting that type of car because I know I'm getting what I paid for, or I know I love, buying that house because I know what I'm getting paid, getting what I paid for. What you don't want to have end up is where you have that high price, but the perceived value is below it. because now that's when people think that it's a ripoff. That's when people are wondering, what are we paying for? And as soon as those kind of questions start entering their mind, that's when you're in trouble. So just for a quick example, Justin's going to take us on a trip. Remember when travel was a thing? Remember when we could travel? So hopefully we're going to be doing this again sometime soon. And as we're all researching our next trip, here's a good thing to remember.
All right, so this is going to be another one where I'm going to ask for your guys' feedback via chat. If you were sitting in quarantine and you were ready to travel, and a friend comes to you and says, "Hey, look, I've been to both of these places. Which one do you want to go to? We're gonna break out of our work from home mode and we're gonna travel. I can vouch for both of them. Which one would you choose, option A or option B?" I'm seeing an A, an A, an A, an A, an A. No B's?
Just like your report card, all A's.
So if you think about this, just looking at these, we've already made our choice. It sounds to me like you're saying that the perceived value of A might be higher than B. Is that about right? That you're saying that I would rather go there. You're saying that must be a higher value. So yeah, go ahead and to the next slide. And we tricked you again. These are the same places. To protect the poorly designed, we removed the logos from this so you cannot see who this is. This is actually one of our clients who we're helping with them because they have a problem. They charge $750 a night for their property. If you've ever been there, you know that it's worth $750 a night. It is an excellent property that you'll tell your friends about and want to come back to. If you go to their website, you will not guess that it's a $750 website or a $750 place. And because of that, their bookings are down. And so our job is to raise their perceived value. It shouldn't be that you go to TripAdvisor and are willing to book, but then you go to their website and you're not willing to book. So that is now our task, is to raise that perceived value. So if we kind of think back about everything we talked about today, what we're trying to get to is eventually being able to communicate something to the effect of saying, "Hi, we're blank," or "This product is blank. We offer this message." You don't even have to say this, but you're thinking, "Looks good, doesn't it?" And you're also hoping that it's going to cost less than you think. That when they see this, they're thinking, "Oh, I'll probably have to pay this price for it." And then when they see the price, they're thinking, "Oh, I could do that, and I want that." So that's what all of these 4 factors are trying to get to. Is it's a strong introduction. They like what they see, and when they're imagining what that price is, they're surprised to see that it's a little bit lower than what they were willing to pay for.
All right, so do we still have your attention? We know it's early. We know it's getting close to lunch. Do we have to pull out any tricks? We've done this dance before. There's actually a video of us in the office. But so let's keep moving, because now we're going to be talking about keeping their attention. So you've had a successful launch, but now you've got to figure out, how do we make sure this pays off and sustains? And so this is an aspect that we don't see covered as much. You know, a lot of people talk about messaging, a lot of people talk about naming and price, but we'd like to talk about participation. Because if you think about your audience, you can kind of look at it as this bell curve, and that first 15% are your influential aspects of your audience, not influencers like capital I, pay them to post about you on Instagram, but these are influencers in a different fashion. But then that 85% is the mainstream. Both sides are important, but what we think is more important is how you approach each side. Because if you look at it, so you've got the influential column, and these people are ahead of the curve. They want access. They want to be the insiders. They want to go behind the scenes. They're excited about something that's new and innovative, and they're willing to buy on potential because they feel really good about the story that's being told. The mainstream side is a little more practical, you know, and so they want proof. They want 10,000 5-star Amazon reviews. They want it to be easy and effective. They don't want to really have to flex a little bit, and they want to buy the endorsed leader. And neither of these are right or wrong. Neither is good or bad. In fact, I can think of myself in some categories of my buying, I'm on the influential side, and on some categories, I'm absolutely on mainstream, and I want someone else to have done the homework. But we like to think about it as the ones on the left, the influential side, they're the ones who write the Yelp reviews or the Amazon reviews because they're willing to take it out for a test. And the mainstream ones are the ones who trust the Yelp and the and the Amazon reviews. So in order to do this, in order to attract that influential side of your audience, you have to ask yourself, and you probably already know these answers, who are your biggest fans? You know, who has interest in your mission? Who has a voice in your community? And these aren't rhetorical questions. You should be able to right now jot down at your desk, you know, and be able to jot down names and be able to say, it's like, all right, that's our biggest champion. That's our biggest advocate. That is someone who has clout in the community. And they would be able to get some sway if they were able to say something great about your organization or your product. And then here's the tough part. How can we give them exclusive access? Because you can't just hand them a press release and tell them to recite it or regurgitate it. You want it to be in their words. You know, we talked about being authentic. You want it to be authentic, but that takes ceding some control. So if you're inviting them in to be a brand ambassador, you still have to let it be in their own voice. And because of that, you have to be willing to take some risk. But that risk gets mitigated when you think about it being a long-term relationship. This is not transactional. This is not inviting them in to one soft launch of your new restaurant and hoping that they give you a rave review. It truly is building that relationship and, you know, counting on them as a regular and not just because they have 10,000 followers on Twitter. So we love examples. So Justin, let's do an example where we had some fun with this in Silicon Valley.
Guys, I'll be honest, we have tried to retire this case study for a couple of years and people keep giving us feedback that they like to hear about this. So if you've seen us talk before, you've heard this case study, I'm sure. But we keep getting feedback on this. So we've stuck it back in here, and I do think it pays off this participation angle probably as well as any case study that we could offer you guys here. A few years ago, we were invited to San Jose, California, and we had a meeting in City Hall. They had invited 12 marketing firms, 11 from California, one from this smaller Midwestern city, to come try to solve a problem for them. They had a talent recruitment problem. They had a city self-esteem problem. They had a business attraction problem. And the same week that we showed up, I guess this would have been, hey, there's the date right there, 2016, this was published, the most forgettable major American city. San Jose is the 10th largest city in the United States. If you're not from there or haven't been there, you probably don't even know where it's at on the map. May not even know if it's in Northern or Southern California. It's sort of the hub of Silicon Valley, but you know it more by Silicon Valley than you do by San Jose. We sold them on an idea that the traditional way of developing a city identity was broken. That if we stand on the steps of City Hall and say, this is who you are, that the city would reject it and that it would not go anywhere. And we said, we cannot do the traditional advertising approach where we tell the citizens who they are and speak directly to the businesses first. We need to earn that and work from and let this bubble up from the community level. And then the last people to know will be people outside the city and those businesses that we're trying to recruit. And they bought into that. They really believed that was the way to go. And so first of all, we have to give the client a lot of credit on here. That was a risky bet to place. And it was going to require some time. So the very first step we did was we started listening. City Hall delivered us a list of community leaders. We asked for the tastemakers, the artists, and the activists. And between the two, we started to see a really well-rounded picture of the city. Developing an identity for any organization, event, product is very hard. Trying to capture that in a city is probably one of the hardest things you can possibly do because it represents so many different types of people. And if you're going to be sharp with it, you have to take all of these diverse points of view and get it down to this one thing. So what we were trying to do was we were taking people who really disagreed with each other on a lot of different issues, but try to find this common thread that even they could agree with. And that it was a really fun and challenging process. And this is an example here of the comm strategy that we presented to the city. And we said, this is going to take 3 years to really make this work. And we're going to start grassroots and then we're going to go formal. We're not going to go formal first and never do grassroots. And we're only going to advance if we start to see buy-in. So we really felt like we were taking kind of a lean approach to where if the city doesn't adopt this, then we're not moving forward. And so we had all these gated checkpoints that we're only doing the next step if we are hitting these certain metrics. So this is the plan. So the next slide, if you're going to have an identity, you need to have some sort of name and a visual to look at. The San Jose name was starting to get actually wiped out. The Business Journal was no longer the San Jose Business Journal. It became the Silicon Valley Business Journal. The Chamber of Commerce took San Jose out of their name, and it became the Silicon Valley Chamber. I've never been to a city where the city's name was being replaced. And so we wanted to show that this name should be something to be proud of. And we really felt like it needed a mark. And so we went through many, many iterations to develop a mark. When we felt like we had it and we felt like we had something that represented it, we talked to those same tastemakers. We didn't talk to the client in City Hall. We actually talked to the tastemakers. And Jake, if you want to show that slide, you can see that it represents the valley. There's a sort of churning motion that kind of represents this idea of fresh innovation in the valley. The typography, we wanted it to look at home in a bike shop just as it would on a corporate campus. And so we shared this with some of those tastemakers. We're basically saying, would you support this? Would you wear this? Is this something you'd be proud of? And we started getting that feedback. And so we moved on to the next step. The way we rolled this out was not very traditional. What we did was we went to a craft fair and we partnered with some screen printers, and we just set up a booth and we screen printed that logo on t-shirts along with 3 other taglines that we were testing out. And we were just pulling ink over this. We were charging $15 a t-shirt, not cheap, not expensive. There was no trace that the city was funding this at all. And we sat back and we just watched to see, do people buy it? If so, who buys it? What age, demographic, gender, all of that. And we passed our test. We saw that there was a lot of interest in it. People were saying, you know, I would wear this, and I've never seen anybody selling something like this before. 2 of our tagline and mantras sold well. One of them was confusing and people didn't buy it, so we cut it. We never used it again. But the best part was the logo was really well adopted. So we moved on to the next step. And the next step was going into coffee shops and bike shops and those places and setting a stack of stickers across all of them. And then we would go back on a weekly basis to see if people were taking the sticker or if they leaving them there. Because if they left them there, that they're signaling they don't care about this and we're off track. Fortunately, every time we go back, the stickers were gone. And so that passed our next test, that people wanted this. And this is when we started seeing them on bumper stickers and laptops. It's about the same time that the mayor had heard rumors that there was some sort of like secret campaign going on in the city. And so he invited us into a meeting just to brief him on what's going on. And as we were prepping for the meeting, his right-hand person came to us and said that the sticker showed up on her 16-year-old son's phone case. And that was very valuable territory to him. So she's like, you're good in my book. You've infected the high schools. So that was a good meeting. And we were able to move on to the next phase, which is where we started to put posters up in town. We were really trying to, again, one of the missions here was to raise city self-esteem. And so we had this kind of language and tone that we wanted to show. They're one of the most diverse cities in the United States. And so we didn't need to say we're diverse. We were just trying to be diverse. And so if you look at some of the translations that we had, we just made sure that we included everybody in every group of the city. We also created these flags that had these mysterious photo shoots and would end up in different magazines around town with no trace of who was doing this. Most people looked at this and assumed it was a magazine. When we first got involved with a client, we said success will be to see whatever the mark is that we produce on t-shirts and on things that people, showing that people really like it. And once we start claiming it for formal communications, we predict that someone will accuse you of stealing this. We set up social listening and we're able to see what people had to say about this type of stuff. We saw when people were posing next to the murals. And then as we moved into the formal communications, people started seeing that someone was purchasing media and now using these marks there. And that's when people on Twitter started to accuse them of, we actually saw one tweet that said, this is unbelievable. Leave it to our city to steal something good that one of the I don't know if it was an artist or a magazine who created this, but leave it to the city to steal this. And so that prediction actually came true. People thought that the city had stole this from an artist in town when they walked into City Hall and saw these marks on the walls there. The coolest part about this story, and the reason why people keep asking us for this case study, I think, is this story right here. About a year into this work, there was a Instagram post that was forwarded to us, and it was this one right here on the right. And as soon as we saw it, everybody on our creative team was like high-fiving each other, like, I can't believe somebody we don't even know got this tattooed on their leg. And we thought, this is like the ultimate success. This is so cool. And then it turns out 2 days later, we started to hear the backstory on this person. So this is Jake McCluskey here on the left, and here in the middle, that's also Jake McCluskey. Jake worked at a brewery. His friends said he would kind of kept to himself too much, and they really challenged him to, work on his health and get outside and see the community. And so he set a goal for himself to run every single street in the city of San Jose. And in the process, over a year and a half, dropped 180 pounds and celebrated by running the San Jose Marathon. And then to celebrate that, he got this tattoo and ended up getting some press, some local press. So to see that he did that and to have that local story behind it was really something that we couldn't have imagined. In fact, the mayor, I think it might've been election year, he jumped in on the bandwagon. He said, "Hey, I'll get a tattoo if you guys retweet me a million times." He got close. He didn't quite get there. But this is something that is really unusual. We would have never sat around and thought, what we should do also is let's bribe somebody to get a tattoo and drop 180 pounds and run marathons and get press. We would have never came up with that. And something that we really learned in the process here on the next slide is, it's not a movement until it moves without you. And this is a case where, we felt like we did it an organic grassroots way. And because of that, things started to move without us. And we really felt like that was kind of the ultimate goal, was to turn this back over to the city and let them take it and run with it. And that kind of speaks to that idea of participation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the payoff there is, you heard Justin talk about how that was a 3-year plan, and so rather than City Hall getting a little anxious and deciding that they wanted to do that announcement on the front steps of City Hall and have everyone reject it because they're being told to love their city instead of falling in love with their city, they truly bought into the idea of participation. But this is the hard part, is that participation requires patience. And everyone, as we've already established, is in short supply. I think it also reinforces that idea of make it 10% wrong, because you saw in Jake's post where he says, I wasn't born here, but San Jose is my home. It's not perfect, but no city is. That really resonates with me, because that's clearly not ad copy that someone gave him. That's truly his feelings. And so as you think about all these different things, realize that I know we all feel like we're in a hurry, but being in a hurry can get you in trouble on some of these things. And so if you look at the two schools of thought with this, if you're looking at launching a new campaign, a new brand identity, anything, the hurry is the flash in the pan. It's go big, go home. You pay for everything just because you're trying to buy your way into people's attention, and you try everything and just hope that something works. And so we like to preach the patience approach, where you build the foundation, where you get that community grassroots buy-in. You try lean experiments, and you're not afraid to fail, because the experiments that work, you can do more of them. And just like Justin said with one of the taglines on the shirts, when we saw it didn't sell, get rid of it. And do that combination of paid and earned and shared, and then you start to earn that credibility, and then you commit to the right approach. And you know that it's going to work because you've got all this great proof behind you. And now you've built this whole community of advocates along the way. So when you're launching something new, we've covered that you need to communicate quickly, you need to communicate sharply, and you need to hit on all cylinders when it comes to name, design, messaging, and even price. And when you need to hold that attention, you really want to lay the groundwork for a participation model.
Guys, thanks for having us here. It would have been a whole lot more fun to have this in person, but thanks to technology, it's nice to stay connected during a moment like this. I think it's this reminder, hopefully, is as important as ever. Stay light and stay loose and stay light with this stuff. Have fun. If you happen to be in marketing or running one of these initiatives, man, that's such a great gig to have right now. So have fun with it, and we'd love to answer any questions you guys have. I think we have a little bit of time.
Looks like we have one from Rachel. Can you guys speak a little bit to the be wrong 10% idea when your brand, being healthcare, is built on being credible and serious?
That's a great question.
Yeah. I'll take this one because I used to work with Rachel at Children's Mercy, and she was part of the amazing team there. And you're spot on. Like, if you're talking about the actual level of care and the provider's expertise, there's no room to be 10% wrong. But when I think about like the different, one of my favorite US News top 10 campaigns where we used kids drawings and we used kids hands, I think some creative directors probably would have been just like, oh my gosh, they colored outside the lines. And it's like, that's exactly what we wanted them to do, And so in that case, I think the 10% wrong was giving it over to a 9-year-old to design a billboard that we're paying a lot of money to put up on I-35, And so, or even, you guys are doing a great job with this. Other healthcare providers during this whole thing, where the information they're sharing is 100% accurate and credible, but they're willing to do it from a living room. They don't always need the perfect sound stage, and so being able to do that, because you don't have time to do that. If something changes, you've got to do a press conference right then, and you don't have time to go full wardrobe and all these different things. And so I think that's where 10% wrong. So again, I wouldn't say inaccurate. I think it's just having a little less polish could sometimes help. But Justin, did you have thoughts on that too?
The origination of that phrase came from me asking the creative team to make their work more unexpected. And then one of them came back and said, hey, how do we do that? And I said, oh, I don't know. And I realized how hard that was to ask them that. And so I had to study, what made work unexpected. What I realized was they were breaking some rules. They were doing something that was a little bit wrong. And so the reason why we say 10% instead of just doing it wrong is that you got to find the little spots where you can bend the rule. And just like healthcare, most businesses need to be taken seriously in many ways, or they have boundaries that they have. So you got to find a little place where you have permission to do something that's just a little off. Sometimes it's as simple as moving the logo where everybody knows it should go to over here. And then they look at it because they're like, why is the logo over there? I'm a highly trained consumer. It's supposed to be right here. So you just kind of got to find, what's your 10%, what's your play area. And even if you can't get it all the time, like just try to push up on it. It's a good challenge to think through, I think, of just how can we mess with something. It makes for the job a whole lot more fun too when you're messing with stuff. But I do think the work's more effective.
Yeah, and I think also you don't want to go so far to the wrong that it looks lazy. Like right now there's like 3 or 4 different insurance commercials out that are all the outtakes of the real commercial. Like there's the Liberty Bibbity, and then you got the Geico saying gecko. But when you see those both in the same commercial break, you're like, well, now you're just 100% lazy, And so I think that's a consideration. And yeah. Julie, I saw your note about, will you speak to the seemingly opposing views of 10% wrong versus I'm going to pay attention because you paid attention. I'll jump in from a social media content standpoint. And then Justin, I'd love to hear your thoughts from the bigger branding. To me, that idea of paying attention because you paid attention it drives me nuts when people auto post across every channel, with their social media content, because you're asking your audience to give their time in reading it, liking it, ideally sharing it. And yet you were too lazy to go and post each to its native channel. Because there's things that look weird on Twitter when they've come over from Facebook or vice versa. And so I've always said, it's like, if I'm asking my audience to give me a few seconds of their time and I didn't have enough seconds to give them to even just have the courtesy of posting on each of their native channels, then shame on me. And so I think some of those things, if it looks like I'm taking a shortcut as a brand, and not going the unexpected route, but just being lazy, then I think that's the difference between 10% wrong and 10% bad.
Every time we've done 10% wrong well, it's taken a whole lot more time. And here's an example. If anybody's ever seen me share a talk before, maybe in previous years, you saw that I would hand draw every slide. And that was just something I did. It took an incredible amount of time to do that. I had the Sharpies out, photographing it, scanning it, all that type of thing. And so it came across, and some people might have said, oh, that looks sloppy. They didn't professionalize this into PowerPoint. Most people were like, oh, this made me interested because it wasn't so predictable like every other PowerPoint I've ever seen. It took an incredible amount of time, but some people might have perceived it as, this guy's lazy, he's just writing stuff out in Sharpies. But that was a way of just doing something different and not doing another PowerPoint. So I'd say a lot of times 10% wrong is actually going to take a lot more time. And I think the right audience will pick up on that.
Yeah. So
I see a question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, speaking of investment of time, Dustin asked about the San Jose case study. How long did the visual identity development take? How many iterations did you go through before landing on that one? Looked like a lot.
The answer is a bunch. We took an interesting process because here's how you typically do it, right? You come up with a bunch of different options. You cull them down to maybe 3 versions. You show the client says, I don't like this one, but let's Frankenstein these. And then you come back, you do 2 or 3 rounds, and that's how you do it, right? This was a city identity, and we didn't really believe, and the city agreed, that they should be the ones who select this. Why should an elected official pick what the identity is for an entire city? So what we did was we went through just a ton of rounds internally. So we didn't count how many rounds there were. And then we got to something where we really felt like what we saw matched up with what we heard from people. And then we put it in front of 5 people. Of that 40, there's 5 people who were really dialed in, who we thought were going to give us good feedback, and we showed it to them. We got feedback from them. We showed them a second time. Most of it was pretty minimal. They didn't have a lot of changes. And then we walked into City Hall. We already had t-shirts printed. We said, guys, that there's people who would already wear this. Do you agree? Can we move forward? And they said, we love that we don't even have to make this decision. You took it out of our hands. Because also they're like, we don't want to be blamed if this flames out. But that was the process. So they love the fact that they're just like, great, people will wear this. Great. Now you're going to go prove it through this craft fair. Okay, cool. So that's kind of the process we took.
Any other questions at all? All right, I just threw my email address in the chat as well. So if anybody has any questions at all, feel free to give me a shout later. But this was a lot of fun. We know that a lot of people are having some Zoom fatigue, so we appreciate you including us on your Friday. But Sydney or Laura, did you guys have anything else from your end?
Yeah, we just wanted to say thank you guys so much for attending today. I think I can speak on behalf of all of our attendees when I say thank you, Justin and Jake, for joining us today and providing us with this wonderful and informational and fun presentation. Before you guys go, I want to remind you to check the KC Chamber calendar for upcoming webinars. I just put the link in the chat. And then I also wanted to let you guys know that the KC Chamber is always on the lookout for helpful content for our members. If there's anything anyone on this chat or this webinar today would like to know more about, please send your suggestions to our content director, Courtney Lewis. Her contact information is also available in the chat. So thank you again to Justin and Jake, and to all of you for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.
Stay well, guys.
Thank you.